funny how confident you are for someone who still hasn't proven herself. Since you're so confident, why don't you step onto the mat and prove it? 1 round. That's all I'm asking. Or are you only tough when nobody's swinging back?
If you're sure. 1 round?
A confident grin spread across Brody's face as if he'd already won. Zoe simply met his gaze and took her position.
Don't worry. I'll try not to embarrass you too badly.
Brody had no idea the quiet 18-year-old standing across from him wasn't an ordinary girl. She was an undefeated champion who had never lost a match. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The courtyard was loud with the kind of noise that meant nothing. Sneakers on pavement, somebody's music bleeding from a window, the general hum of 1,000 students who had somewhere to be. Zoe Okerson cut through all of it like she always did. Head up, eyes open. Not nervous, just watching. 5 days at Caldwell University. 5 days of memorizing which paths were fastest, which dining hall lines moved, which faces meant trouble. That last one was a habit Grandpa Robert had drilled into her so deep she didn't even notice she was doing it anymore. Read the room before the room reads you. She heard his voice in her head so often it was like background music. Her backpack was second-hand, dark blue, one strap slightly frayed. Her sneakers had seen better years. The scholarship covered tuition and housing. It did not cover everything else, and Zoe had made her peace with that somewhere around age 14. She kept moving. Avery Lagman fell into step beside her, already talking. That was the thing about Avery. She arrived in the middle of sentences, like the conversation had been going on without you, and she was just letting you catch up. They'd been roommates for 5 days, and Zoe already trusted her more than people she'd known for years. Avery was sharp. Avery noticed things. She was noticing something right now. "Don't look left," Avery said, which meant Zoe immediately looked left. The laughter hit first. Not the kind that meant something was funny. The kind that meant someone had an audience and knew it. A group of students had formed a loose half-circle near the entrance to the recreation center, and at the center of that half-circle stood a tall young man in a white athletic jacket. He had the kind of face that knew it was good-looking. His hair was neat. His posture was easy. He was smiling the way people smile when they want you to understand that they are in charge. In front of him stood a boy who looked like he'd shrunk 3 inches in the last 60 seconds. He was a freshman. Zoe could tell by the way he held himself, that particular combination of wanting to disappear and not knowing how. He had clearly knocked something. There was a gym bag on the ground between them, a dark wet stain spreading from the zipper. The tall young man crouched down, slowly, deliberately, until he was eye level with the boy. He picked up the bag with 2 fingers, held it out like it was evidence at a crime scene. "You know what this bag costs?" he said. His voice was pleasant. That was the worst part of it. How pleasant he sounded. "Do you have any idea what's in here?" The boy started to speak. Something stumbled out. "Sorry. Accident. I didn't mean to." The tall young man stood back up to his full height and nodded slowly, like he was carefully considering this information. He looked around at his friends, then back at the boy. His smile widened. "You should be more careful," he said, "around people who know how to hurt you." Nobody moved. Avery grabbed Zoe's sleeve. Her grip was tight. "Don't. That's Brody Walter. His dad owns half this school." Zoe was already moving. She crossed the distance without hurrying. She didn't say anything until she reached the bag on the ground, bent down, picked it up, and placed it back in Brody Walter's hands. Then she looked at him. Not up at him, though he had height on her. Just at him. Level. Steady. He said he was sorry, she said. That was all. No edge in her voice, no performance. Just a plain fact, delivered plainly. The courtyard went a different kind of quiet. Brody Walter looked at her. Really looked, the way people look when they're categorizing. She could almost see him doing it. Young, black, female. No one she recognized standing behind her. New. The smile came back, slower this time. I don't think we've met, he said. We haven't, Zoe said, and she walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She'd seen everything she needed to see in his face. The flicker of surprise, the recalibration, and underneath both of those things, something that had nothing to do with a spilled gym bag. Avery materialized at her side, voice low and urgent. What is wrong with you? Do you have a death wish? Zoe kept walking. No, she said. I just really hate bullies. That evening, the dining hall was loud and warm and smelled like overcooked pasta. Zoe and Avery took a corner table, trays between them, and Avery talked while Zoe ate and listened. 3 complaints, Avery said, keeping her voice low, even though the nearest table was 20 feet away. 2 years. 3 different girls. She stabbed a piece of broccoli. All 3 dropped. All 3 just gone. Gone how? Gone as if nobody talks about them anymore. Gone as in the girls transferred or went quiet. Avery set her fork down. Dean Preston sits on the disciplinary board. You know who funded the new athletic wing? The one they're still building on the east side of campus? Zoe looked at her. Hector Walter, Avery said. Brody's father. $15 million. She let that number sit there between them for a second. So, you see what I'm saying? Zoe saw exactly what she was saying. She picked up her water, drank, set it back down. The math was simple and ugly and old. Money talked, complaints walked. It wasn't complicated. It was just how things worked when the wrong people had enough of the right resources. She'd seen versions of it her whole life, just with smaller numbers attached. Okay, she said. Avery stared at her. Okay? That's what you've got? I mean, I understand. I'm not saying it's okay. Avery shook her head slowly, like she was still working out exactly who she'd ended up living with. The next 2 days, Brody made his moves. They were careful moves, the kind that could always be explained away if anyone asked. The first was the lunch tray. Tuesday. Zoe was carrying hers from the serving line, navigating a crowded dining hall, and Brody came the other way with his group, and his elbow caught the edge of her tray just enough to slosh orange juice across her sleeve. He kept walking, didn't stop. One of his friends laughed. Theo Bassett, big, with small eyes and a permanent smirk, already had his phone out, already recording. The second was Wednesday. The courtyard between the science building and the library, where students spilled out between classes. Zoe was crossing it with her head down, reading notes on her phone, when she heard it. Yo, nice shoes. Brody's voice, easy and carrying, aimed at her from where he stood with 4 others. A couple of students nearby looked over. Are those from the discount bin, or? He tilted his head. Yeah, discount bin. Laughter, scattered, but enough. Zoe stopped. She looked at him. She took a breath in through her nose, slow and quiet, the way Grandpa Robert had taught her when she was 8 years old and furious after her first real loss on the mat. A girl 2 years older who had gotten inside her guard and stayed there. She had come off that mat red-faced and ready to cry, and Robert had sat her down on a bench and said the same thing he always said when she let the heat get to her. The loudest person in the room is usually the most afraid. She had not understood it at 8. She understood it better now, watching Brody Walter perform for 4 people in a campus courtyard in the middle of the afternoon. She said nothing. She kept walking. Behind her, Theo Bassett lowered his phone. The video was already saved. That night, Zoe sat on her dorm bed and did her reading for her biology class, and Avery sat across from her doing the same thing, and neither of them talked about Brody Walter. There was nothing new to say. Avery was worried. Zoe could see it in the way her dorm mate kept glancing up. But she also understood by now that Zoe didn't want to be talked at. She just wanted to move through it at her own speed. Zoe reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out the small photograph. Robert Okerson, 1987. A tournament somewhere in Georgia. The name of the venue faded at the bottom. He was young in the photo, younger than she ever really thought of him being. And he was grinning like someone had just told him the best news of his life. Arms at his sides, chest out. Not performing, just certain. She pinned it to the corkboard above her desk and looked at it for a moment. Then she turned back to her textbook and kept reading. 2 floors down, Brody Walter typed a message to Theo Bassett. Short, purposeful. Friday. Recreation Center. Open practice. He pressed send and put his phone face down on his desk. Friday came the way trouble usually did. Sunny, ordinary, giving no warning. The recreation center was alive by mid-afternoon. The karate club held open practice every Friday, doors wide, anyone welcome to watch. It was part of how Brody Walter had built his reputation, visible, public, impossible to ignore. The room smelled like rubber mats and effort. Music thumped from a small Bluetooth speaker in the corner. Students in white GIs moved through drills, while a larger group of spectators lined the walls, some sitting on the bleachers, some just passing through. Zoe and Avery were passing through. They were heading to the campus gym on the far side of the building. Zoe had a habit of training on Friday afternoons. Nothing organized, just movement, just the quiet satisfaction of using her body the way Robert had taught her. She had her gym bag over one shoulder. She was not thinking about Brody Walter. Then she was. "Hey!" His voice came from the center of the room, easy and carrying, aimed like something thrown. "New girl." Zoe stopped. Avery stopped half a step later. Brody stood in the middle of the main mat, surrounded by his usual circle. He was in his GI, black belt tied loose at his waist, arms relaxed at his sides. He was smiling. Around him, the room was already shifting. People turning, conversations dying, the particular electricity that moves through a crowd when it senses something is about to happen. Theo Bassett already had his phone up. "You looked at me the other day like you knew something," Brody said. He tilted his head. Pleasant, curious, like this was just friendly conversation. "You train?" Zoe looked at him. "No." Which was true, technically. She did not train karate. Brody's smile widened. He spread his arms a little, an open gesture, welcoming. "Come spar, just for fun." He said the last 2 words softly, the way you'd say something to a child. "I'll go easy. I promise." Avery's hand found Zoe's arm immediately, fingers closing around her elbow. "Walk away," she said, voice tight and low. "Zoe, walk away right now." The crowd had fully turned. 20, maybe 25 students watching. 3 phones up that Zoe could count. Brody stood in the center of all of it, like he was exactly where he always wanted to be, which he was. This was the performance. This was what the last 2 weeks had been building toward. Get her in this room, in front of this audience, and make her either back down publicly or step on his mat and get taken apart. Either way, he won. That was how he'd designed it. Zoe's eyes moved across the room. The bleachers, the walls, the far corner near the equipment rack where a boy sat alone on the bottom bench, his hands between his knees, watching. The freshman from the courtyard. the one who'd spilled the drink. He hadn't moved when Brody had crouched down to his level and threatened him with that soft, pleasant voice. He'd just gone still and waited for it to be over. He was still going still waiting. Zoe looked back at Brody. She thought about Robert. She thought about what he would say, and she thought about what he would do. And then she thought about how those were sometimes two different things, and how he had always been honest with her about that. She set her gym bag down on the nearest bench. "Okay," she said. The sound that moved through the crowd was almost physical. Avery made a noise beside her that was somewhere between a gasp and a groan. Brody's smile settled into something satisfied, something that had already written the ending of this story before it began. Zoe pulled off her jacket and handed it to Avery, who took it without a word, eyes wide. From across the room, a voice cut through the noise. Quiet, measured, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to land. "Give them space." Instructor Kenji Takahashi stood against the far wall, arms folded across his chest. He was somewhere in his 50s, compact and still, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades on mats. He had not told Zoe to stop. He had not told Brody to stop. He was watching with an expression Zoe couldn't quite read. Not worried, exactly. Something more careful than that. She stepped onto the mat barefoot. Brody rolled his neck slowly, one side and then the other, the pop of it audible in the quiet. He looked at her, the way people look at something they have already decided. He had no idea. Neither did anyone else in that room. Almost anyone. Takahashi unfolded his arms, watched, said nothing. The room went the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Not silent. The building still hummed. Someone's music still leaked from somewhere down the hall. But the crowd had pulled its breath in and held it. And that created a stillness that felt almost physical. 20-something students pressed toward the edges of the mat. Phones were up. Theo Bassett had moved to a better angle without anyone asking him to. Brody Walter rolled his shoulders and stepped forward. He was good. Zoe registered that immediately and filed it away without judgment. He moved like someone who had trained for years and had won enough to know it. His stance was clean. His weight was centered. He was not rushing, which told her he was experienced enough to know that rushing was how you lost. He was also performing. That was the other thing she registered. Every adjustment of his feet, every tilt of his chin. It was aimed at the crowd as much as at her. He wanted this to look a certain way. He wanted it to look like what he believed it was. He came at her first with a shoulder grab. Testing, probing, the opening move of someone who wanted to feel out what he was working with. His grip was strong. Zoe rolled her shoulder back and under it, breaking contact cleanly, stepping offline. Nothing dramatic. Just gone. His eyes registered something. Not concern, curiosity. He threw a kick next. Fast, controlled, aimed at her midsection. She read it in his hip before his leg moved and dropped underneath it, letting it pass over her, already moving to reset. A murmur went through the crowd. Brody landed, adjusted his footing, and the smile was still there, but it had changed slightly. Less performance in it now, more focus. He came again. Faster this time, combination. A feint high, a grab low, his body dropping for a takedown, arms shooting for her legs. It was a good shot. Clean technique, real power behind it. Against most people in that room, it would have worked without argument. Zoe sprawled. Her hips dropped back and down, her weight shifting in a single practiced motion that her body had performed so many thousands of times it didn't need her brain to approve it first. Brody's arms found air where her legs had been. His momentum carried him forward and down, and before he had finished processing what had gone wrong, she was behind him. She took his back. both hooks in, her legs securing his hips, her chest against his back, and her right arm sliding under his chin. Not violent, not wrenching, just inevitable. The rear naked choke locked in with the quiet precision of something that had been practiced until it was simply a fact of her body. Brody tapped the mat with his palm. 11 seconds after first contact. Zoe released immediately, stepped back, extended her hand. The room detonated. It wasn't organized noise, it was the sound of 20 people reacting all at once, each one differently, and the result was something that bounced off the walls and ceiling and came back louder. Phones swung toward each other, checking footage. Someone actually shouted. Avery, standing at the edge of the mat, had both hands pressed over her mouth, eyes enormous. Brody stared at Zoe's outstretched hand. His chest was rising and falling. His face had gone a deep, blotchy red that had nothing to do with physical effort, and everything to do with what had just happened to him in front of 25 people, and at least 6 cameras. The performance smile was gone. There was nothing in his expression now that was designed for an audience. This was just Brody Walter, unfiltered, and what was underneath was not pretty. He did not take her hand. He stood up on his own, turned away, and walked to the edge of the mat. Theo lowered his phone slowly. Nobody in Brody's circle was making noise anymore. Zoe lowered her hand. She was not embarrassed. She was not angry. She turned to step off the mat and found instructor Takahashi standing 2 feet away, watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on an adult's face in a long time. It was the expression of someone recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a situation. "Who trained you?" he asked. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it. "My grandfather," she said. "What's his name?" "Robert Okerson." Something moved across Takahashi's face. Not surprise, exactly. Something older than surprise. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different quality to it entirely. "I know that name," he said. "Your grandfather competed at Nationals, 1987. He paused. "He was extraordinary." Zoe went very still. Robert had never told her that. In 11 years of training together, in every conversation they'd ever had about competition and discipline and what it meant to show up and do the work, he had never once mentioned Nationals, never mentioned 1987, never said the word extraordinary about himself. Her throat tightened. Her eyes went briefly, involuntarily, bright. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, because it was all she could manage. For 24 hours, Caldwell University felt different. Not dramatically different. The buildings were the same, the paths were the same. The dining hall still smelled like overcooked pasta on Saturday morning. But the air had changed. Zoe could feel it in the way people looked at her when she crossed the courtyard. Not the cataloging look Brody had given her that first day. This was something else. Recognition. A few people nodded. A girl she'd never met stopped her outside the science building and said simply, "That was incredible," and kept walking before Zoe could respond. Marcus Finser's video had moved fast. By Friday night, it was everywhere in the campus networks. Group chats, dormitory feeds, the unofficial student forum, where everything that actually mattered got discussed. By Saturday morning it had jumped further, shared and reshared, until it had a life entirely its own. Avery sat cross-legged on her bed, reading comments out loud, while Zoe ate a granola bar and tried to focus on her biology notes. "This one says you're a prodigy," Avery announced. "I'm not a prodigy." "This one says Brody should quit the karate club." Zoe turned a page. "This one—" Avery stopped, looked up, grinned. "This one says you're the most important person on campus." "That one's definitely wrong." But even Zoe, who did not perform and did not need the approval of strangers, felt something ease inside her chest that she hadn't realized had been tight. She picked up the photograph of Robert from her corkboard and looked at it for a moment. 1987. Nationals. Extraordinary. She set it back gently. It felt, briefly and completely, like it was over. It wasn't. Saturday evening arrived, and so did the machinery, smooth and quiet and powerful, the way things move when the right people make a single phone call. Hector Walter made his. Who he called first, Preston directly, or someone above Preston who then called Preston, Zoe never found out. What she found out was the result. Sunday morning. A formal email in her student inbox. Dean Oswald Preston requested her presence in his office Monday at 9 a.m. The subject line read, "Urgent. Scholarship Conduct Review." Zoe read it twice. Then she called her mother. Divine Okerson arrived Monday morning at 7:30, 2 hours before the meeting, in clean clothes and her good shoes. She drove 3 hours from Westside Atlanta without complaint, without drama, without anything except the quiet purposefulness that had gotten her through 30 years of hard things. She was 44 years old and had the kind of face that had earned every line on it. She hugged Zoe once, firmly, and then said, "Tell me everything." Zoe told her everything. Preston's office was on the 3rd floor of the administration building, all warm wood paneling and framed institutional photographs. He was a trim man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the practiced manner of someone who had delivered bad news so many times he'd gotten comfortable with it. He offered them both coffee. They both declined. He was smooth. That was the thing that made Zoe's jaw tighten as she sat across from him. How smooth he was, how regretful he sounded, as though he were a doctor delivering a difficult diagnosis, rather than a man doing exactly what Hector Walter's money had purchased. The video, he explained, had created a complicated situation. The recreation center was college property. The karate club was a sanctioned organization. The conduct clause in Zoe's scholarship was quite specific about behavior that could be considered. He paused here, chose his word carefully, prejudicial to the university's reputation. She was invited onto that mat, Divine said. Her voice was level. On camera, by the other student. "I understand your perspective, Mrs. Okerson." "Ms." Preston adjusted. "Ms. Okerson, I understand. But the review process is standard procedure, and I'm not in a position to—" "Who initiated the review?" Divine asked. Preston smiled gently. "That's not information I'm able to share." They walked out 20 minutes later into the bright Monday morning, the hearing date set for 2 weeks out. Divine's heels were sharp on the administration building steps. Zoe's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. Unknown number. She stopped walking and looked at the screen. A photograph. Brody Walter and Theo Bassett. Mid-laugh. Casual. Somewhere on campus. Beneath it, a caption in plain text. "We're going to make sure she never feels comfortable here again." Zoe stared at it. Then she showed it to her mother. Divine looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she took Zoe's hand in both of hers and held it. Not frantically. Not with panic. With the particular steadiness of a woman who had decided long ago that she did not run from things. "We don't run," she said quietly. Zoe closed her hand around her mother's and nodded. "I know," she said. "We never have." Monday evening arrived with its own kind of damage. Zoe was back in her dorm room by 6, biology textbook open on her desk, trying to make her brain do normal things. Avery was on her bed, laptop open, scrolling through the student forum the way you scroll through something when you already know it's going to be bad, and you're looking anyway. She found it at 6:14. Zoe. Something in Avery's voice made Zoe close the textbook. The post had gone up 2 hours earlier. Anonymous account, username a random string of letters and numbers that had been created that same day. The title was calm and measured, which made it worse somehow than if it had been hysterical. Concerning behavior at Friday's open practice, what the video doesn't show. Below it, several paragraphs, carefully written. The kind of careful that takes time and intention. The post did not scream. It reasoned. It suggested that Zoe had entered a sanctioned club space under false pretenses, having claimed no training background when she clearly possessed one. It suggested that Brody Walter, in good faith, had extended a friendly invitation that had been exploited. It used the phrase safe space 3 times. It asked, in its final paragraph, whether students who wished to train without fear of deceptive outsiders could expect the university to take their concerns seriously. Avery read the last line out loud. Her voice was flat with disbelief. Deceptive outsiders. Zoe said nothing. By Tuesday morning, the post had 47 replies. A significant portion of them agreed with it. By Tuesday afternoon, a petition had appeared, a separate document linked from the forum, calling for clearer protocols around visitor participation in sanctioned club activities. It had 62 signatures by the time Zoe saw it. She recognized 3 names from the karate club's public roster. Then came the video clip. Someone had found it. A 2-minute segment from a local Atlanta sports channel, 2 years old, covering a regional grappling tournament. The headline in the original piece had been about the tournament's youngest competitors. Zoe appeared briefly, mid-match, decisively winning. Someone had clipped that segment, removed the original context, and reposted it to the forum beneath a new caption typed in all capital letters. She lied. She went there to attack him. This was premeditated. Avery stood up from her bed. I'm posting a response right now. Avery, no, this is insane. Everyone can see the original video. Everyone watched him dare you onto that mat. She typed fast and posted faster. A thorough, factual response with timestamps from Marcus's original video, quoting Brody's exact words, pointing out the sequence of events in plain language. It was good, clear and well-sourced, and completely reasonable. By that evening, it had been removed by forum moderators. The original post remained. The petition remained. The clipped video with the all-caps caption remained. Avery stared at her screen with an expression that had moved past disbelief into something colder. 2 of the moderators are in the karate club, she said. I just checked. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Then, document everything. Screenshots, timestamps, all of it. Avery was already doing it. Marcus Fincer called Zoe that evening. He'd written a full response piece for the student paper. Not opinion, reporting. The original video, the forum posts, the moderator removals, the petition signatories cross-referenced with club membership. Thorough, careful, properly sourced. He was proud of it, and Zoe could hear it in his voice, that particular energy of someone who had done good work and knew it. His editor killed it by 9 p.m. Marcus called back, voice stripped of its earlier energy, to tell her. Senior student. Didn't want the paper involved in something that touched a major donor family. Liability concerns. Maybe later, when things settled. Zoe thanked him and hung up. She sat at her desk for a long time after that. The textbook was still closed in front of her. The photo of Robert looked down from the corkboard. Outside the window, campus was doing its ordinary nighttime things. Voices on the path below, a door banging somewhere, a bicycle bell. She opened the textbook again. She read the same paragraph 4 times without taking in a single word. Then she closed it, pulled her scholarship letter from her desk drawer, and found the conduct clause. She had read it on Sunday. She read it again now. The same sentence caught her the same way. Conduct prejudicial to the university's reputation. She set the letter down, pressed both palms flat on her desk, breathed. Grandpa Robert had told her once that the hardest part of any fight wasn't the moment of contact. It was the waiting before it. The not knowing. The space where your own mind could do more damage than any opponent. She folded the letter back up, put it in the drawer, turned off her lamp. She was not going to let her own mind be the thing that beat her. Wednesday morning came gray and close, the sky the color of old concrete, the air sitting heavy and still over the campus, like it couldn't be bothered to move. Zoe checked her email before she was fully awake, which had become a habit she didn't like and couldn't stop. The message from Takahashi was there, sent at 7:12 a.m., before most of campus had stirred. She sat up in bed and read it twice. It was a good email. Careful and specific. He had witnessed the events of Friday afternoon from start to finish. He was prepared to provide a formal written statement confirming that Brody Walter had issued the invitation publicly and voluntarily, that Zoe had not misrepresented herself in any actionable sense, and that the characterization of her as an aggressor was not consistent with what he had observed. He wrote clearly and without hedging. He signed it with his full name and his faculty title. Zoe read it a third time, and something in her chest loosened by a fraction. She got up, showered, dressed, ate half a granola bar standing at her desk, and went to her 9 a.m. class. She took notes. She paid attention. She did the ordinary things because the ordinary things still needed doing, and because Grandpa Robert had told her once that the moment you let your trouble become your whole life, you've already handed your opponent the first point. She got back to the dorm at 11:30. Avery was sitting on her bed with her laptop open, and an expression that Zoe had learned to read in the past week. Careful, braced, delivering something bad in the gentlest available packaging. Takahashi sent another email, Avery said. He forwarded it to you and CC'd me since I'm involved in the documentation. I think he wanted witnesses to the fact that he sent it. Zoe sat down and opened her phone. The second email was shorter than the first. Takahashi wrote that he had received a private communication from a member of the athletic department advising him to, he quoted the phrase directly, remain within his professional boundaries regarding matters currently under administrative review. He wrote that he needed time to consider his position. He wrote that he was sorry. He signed it the same way, full name and title, but something about it felt different. Smaller somehow, like a door closing quietly rather than slamming. Zoe set her phone face down on the bed. Avery said, "He's scared." "I know. That's not okay." "I know that too." She stared at the ceiling for a moment, jaw tight, and then sat back up, because there was no version of lying on her back that fixed anything. She pulled her laptop onto her knees and started drafting a response to Takahashi's second email. Measured, understanding, no pressure, leaving the door open. She did not tell him she needed him. She did not make him feel guilty. She simply told him she appreciated his honesty and that she understood. She pressed send and closed the laptop. It was 3 in the afternoon, 3 days before the weekend, 9 days before the hearing, when Avery came back from her financial aid office appointment with red eyes and very still hands. She set her bag down with unusual care, like she was trying not to disturb the air. She sat on her bed, said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I got a message last night. Anonymous. It said my financial aid application was going to face an administrative review if I kept posting publicly about your case." The room was quiet. "They can't do that," Zoe said, though she said it knowing that the word can't had very little meaning when the wrong people had enough leverage. "Maybe not," Avery said, "but I can't." Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed her lips together. "My family can't afford this school without that aid." "I can't risk it, Zoe. I'm so sorry." Zoe crossed the room and sat beside her. She put a hand on Avery's arm. "Stop," she said firmly. "Stop apologizing. You are not doing anything wrong. I feel like I'm abandoning you." "You're not." Zoe's voice was steady and deliberate. "You have to protect yourself. I mean that. I won't let you bleed for this." Avery wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed by them. Zoe wasn't embarrassed by anything. She sat with her dorm mate until the red left her eyes and the still hands relaxed. And then she walked back to her own desk and sat down alone. She thought about Grandpa Robert after a regional loss when she was 15. She'd been furious, certain she'd been cheated by a bad call, ready to take the whole system apart with her bare hands. He'd sat across from her in the car, engine off in the parking lot, and said it so quietly she'd had to lean in to hear. "You don't win on the mat in 10 seconds. You win in the 2 years before you ever step on it." She opened her notebook. She started writing down everything she remembered, in order, with dates and times. She was going to need it. Thursday morning arrived quieter than the ones before it. Zoe had slept in pieces. 2 hours, then awake, then another stretch that didn't feel like real sleep, so much as her body going through the motions of it. She was at her desk by 7 with instant coffee that tasted like hot water with ambitions, reading back through her notebook. Dates. Times. The sequence of everything that had happened since that first afternoon in the courtyard. She had 4 pages now, front and back, her handwriting getting smaller and more compressed as the pages filled. At 7:48, someone knocked on her dorm room door. Not Avery. Avery was still asleep, her breathing slow and even from across the room. Zoe stood, crossed to the door, and opened it. Vera Lattimore was not a tall woman, but she occupied space the way tall people do, with a kind of settled authority that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with having been exactly who she was for a very long time. She was 58, with natural silver-streaked hair cut close and a face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most of it. She was Caldwell's women's athletics director, which meant she had an office in the building where decisions got made and a front-row seat to exactly how those decisions were arrived at. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the good place off campus. She extended one toward Zoe. "You look like you need this more than I do," she said. "Can I come in?" They sat at Zoe's desk and the small chair Avery used for video calls. The door closed, Avery still sleeping undisturbed 3 feet away. Lattimore did not open with comfort. She did not tell Zoe it was going to be okay. What she offered instead was information, delivered in the same direct, unhurried way she apparently did everything. "I've been watching the Walter family operate at this school for 11 years, Lattimore said. "What's happening to you right now is not new. The packaging changes. The target changes. The machinery underneath is always the same." Zoe wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Tell me what you know," Lattimore told her. Before Caldwell, Brody Walter had attended a private university in Tennessee for 1 semester. During that semester, a female student-athlete had filed a formal complaint against him. Physical intimidation following a training incident that bore a striking resemblance to what had happened in Caldwell's recreation center. The complaint had not gone through the institution's normal process. It had been intercepted early, handled through private attorneys, and resolved through a financial settlement that included a non-disclosure agreement. The record had been sealed. The woman who filed the complaint had left the school by the end of the semester. She had left competitive athletics entirely. Her name was Selena Dalton. She was now a licensed attorney practicing in Atlanta. "She's 26, Lattimore said. "She's been building her practice for 2 years. She's cautious, and she has every right to be. That NDA has teeth, and Hector Walter's lawyers made sure she knew it." She paused. "I found her last week. I reached out. She agreed to listen." Zoe was very still. "What does that mean? Agreed to listen?" "It means she hasn't said no." Lattimore set down her cup. "It means there's a door that isn't closed yet. But I want to be honest with you. I can't promise you what's behind it. She's scared. She has reasons to be scared that are legitimate. and that I respect. How much time do we have? 9 days until your hearing. The number sat between them. 9 days was not a lot. 9 days was also not nothing. And Zoe had learned from Robert that the calculation of what was possible in a given window of time was almost always more generous than it first appeared, provided you used every hour of it. "What do you need from me?" Zoe asked. Lattimore looked at her for a moment, the kind of look that is also a measure, that is checking something. Whatever she found appeared to satisfy her. "Stay clean," she said. "No public statements, no forum posts, no reactions to whatever they put up next." She held up a finger. "Stay visible. Go to class. Eat in the dining hall. Don't disappear. Don't give them a narrative where you looked guilty by hiding." A second finger. "And let me work." Zoe nodded. Lattimore stood, picked up her cup, moved toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame and looked back. "Your grandfather," she said. "Robert Okerson." Something moved briefly in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. "He was a good man. The best kind. The kind who did important things without needing anyone to know about it." Zoe looked up sharply. "You knew him?" But Lattimore had already stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click. Zoe sat with her coffee going cold in her hands and the question hanging unanswered in the quiet room. 6 days before the hearing, Marcus Finzer made a decision. Zoe found out about it the same way the rest of campus did. A link dropped into a group chat she'd been added to without asking, followed immediately by 17 messages in quick succession, each one a variation of, "Did you see this?" and "Oh my God," and "He actually did it." She clicked the link. Marcus had published everything. Not in the student paper, his editor had made that door very clear, but on his personal journalism blog, a site he'd been running since high school with a modest following and a clean, straightforward design. He had posted the original video in full. He had posted a written piece beside it. Not an opinion column, not a rant, but actual reporting. The sequence of events from the courtyard to the recreation center to the disciplinary notice. The forum posts and their timestamps. The moderator removals, documented with screenshots. The petition signatories cross-referenced with karate club membership. All of it sourced, all of it verifiable, all of it laid out in plain language that anyone could follow. The last paragraph was short. It simply asked one question. When the student who issued the dare faces no review, and the student who accepted it faces losing her scholarship, what exactly is the conduct clause protecting? Zoe read the piece twice, sitting on the edge of her bed in the gray early morning. Then she put her phone down and looked at the photo of Robert on her corkboard. By noon, a regional black press outlet had reposted the piece in full with an editor's note calling the situation a clear example of institutional bias. By 3 in the afternoon, a national sports media account with 200,000 followers had shared Marcus's original video with a single caption. "Watch this, and then read what happened after." Campus transformed. It didn't happen slowly. It happened the way pressure releases, suddenly and all at once. The student forum, which had been running the anti-Zoe narrative for days, was overwhelmed by incoming voices that the moderators couldn't remove fast enough. Alumni began calling the main administration line. A prominent civil rights organization issued a public statement by 4 p.m., calling on Caldwell to immediately suspend the scholarship review and investigate the complaint suppression pattern. Someone started a hashtag. By Friday evening, DAR's Zoe Okerson was moving through Atlanta's social media with real momentum. Dean Preston was photographed leaving a faculty meeting with his jaw set and his eyes pointed at the floor. Avery sat on Zoe's bed Friday night and read things out loud until her voice got hoarse. Outside, campus was louder than a regular Friday, people stopping each other on the paths, conversations spilling out of open dormitory windows. Zoe sat cross-legged across from her, back against the wall, listening. She had not posted anything. She had not given any statements. She had done exactly what Lattimore told her to do. Stayed clean, stayed visible, let it move. But she felt it. She would have had to be made of stone, not to feel it. The 48 hours were warm and bright, and full of the particular relief that comes when you have been carrying something heavy alone for a long time, and suddenly other people are helping hold the weight. She let herself feel it. She thought Robert would have allowed her that much. "Maybe it's going to be okay," Avery said at some point. Late, the laptop finally closed, the room dim and quiet. Zoe looked at her. "Maybe," she said. She meant it. For the first time since Preston's office, she actually, genuinely meant it. She slept well that night, deeply and without interruption. The kind of sleep that only comes when the body finally believes, even briefly, that it can afford to let go. Sunday arrived soft and ordinary. Birds. Campus maintenance doing something loud and mechanical somewhere on the north side. The smell of whatever the dining hall was making drifting through a cracked window. Zoe woke at 7, lay still for a moment, and reached for her phone out of habit. The campus news alert had come in at 6:43 a.m. She read it once. Read it again. Her hand was very steady holding the phone, which surprised some distant part of her, because the rest of her had gone completely cold. Walter Family Files. Emergency legal action citing defamation. Scholarship student and student journalist named as co-defendants. University cites legal uncertainty. Announces postponement of pending disciplinary hearing. The warmth of the last 48 hours didn't fade gradually. It stopped. Zoe set her phone face down on the mattress, sat up, put both feet on the floor. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. Then she reached for her notebook and opened it to a new page. The legal documents were 12 pages long and written in the particular language that lawyers use when they want something to feel inevitable. Dense, formal, full of phrases that sounded like closed doors. Zoe had read all 12 pages by the time she arrived at Lattimore's office Sunday afternoon. She had printed them at the campus library, sitting alone at a terminal in the back corner, while a few other students moved quietly around her, none of them knowing what she was reading, none of them looking twice at the girl in the worn sneakers with the very still face. Lattimore's office was small and organized in the way that offices get when someone has worked in them for a long time and learned exactly where everything needs to be. Filing cabinets along one wall, a desk with 2 monitors, a framed photograph of a women's track team from what looked like the early 90s, faded at the edges. Lattimore was already there when Zoe arrived, the documents open on her screen, reading glasses on. She looked up when Zoe came in and gestured to the chair across the desk. Zoe sat, put the printed pages on the desk between them. "They named Marcus, too," Zoe said. "I know." He published facts, documented facts with sources. "I know that, too." Lattimore took her glasses off. "The suit is almost certainly frivolous. Their legal argument has significant holes, but that's not the point of it. And Hector Walter's attorneys know it's not the point of it." She set the glasses down. "The point is the postponement. They filed the injunction arguing that the video's spread constitutes defamation, and the university's administration, worried about being named in subsequent action, used it as cover to freeze the disciplinary hearing pending legal clarity, which means my scholarship stays suspended, which means your scholarship stays suspended. You cannot register for next semester until the hearing concludes." The words landed the way facts land when you already knew them, but needed someone to say them plainly so you could stop hoping you'd misread. Zoe nodded once and looked at the filing cabinet on the wall for a moment. "There's something else," Lattimore said. Her tone shifted slightly, careful in a way it hadn't been before, and Zoe looked back at her. Lattimore's phone had rung that morning at 8 a.m. Selena Dalton, calling from Atlanta, voice tight and controlled. She had been watching the coverage from her office. She had been thinking, carefully and seriously, about the NDA and whether it held the weight Hector Walters' attorneys had always implied it did. She had consulted her own attorney over the weekend, and she had found something, a potential flaw in the agreement's enforceability, a misrepresentation made at the time of signing regarding Brody's disciplinary status at his previous institution. If the foundational premise of the agreement contained a misrepresentation, the agreement itself might not hold. It was not certain. It was a possibility, but it was real. And then, at 9:15 a.m., a cease and desist letter had arrived at Selena Dalton's office from Hector Walters' attorneys. Lattimore had called Selena back at 10. Selena's voice had been different the second time. Quieter, pulled inward. She had a practice. 2 years of building it, client by client. She had people depending on her. She could not absorb what a protracted legal fight with Hector Walters' resources would do to a small firm that was still finding its footing. She was sorry. She was genuinely, deeply sorry. But she could not formally testify. Lattimore delivered all of this in the same steady, unhurried way she delivered everything. And when she finished, the office was very quiet. Zoe looked at the desk between them, at the 12 pages of legal language, at the framed track team photograph on the wall, at her own hands resting on her knees. She pressed both palms flat against them, the grounding technique Robert had taught her when she was 10 years old and overwhelmed, the physical act of feeling something solid beneath your hands when everything else felt like it was moving. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Her voice, when it came, barely moved the air between them. "So we have nothing." Lattimore looked at her for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the particular weight of someone who has not given up and needs you to understand that. "Not nothing," she said. "We have the truth. We just need one more thing." Zoe looked up. "What?" "Proof that this school already knew about Brody Walter." Lattimore's eyes were steady and direct, and chose Hector Walters' money anyway. The office was quiet again. Zoe pressed her palms harder against her knees. Then she nodded. She drove home Sunday evening with the windows down and the radio off. 3 hours from Caldwell to West Side Atlanta, and Zoe spent most of it watching the highway unspool in front of her headlights, and not thinking about legal documents or forum posts or Dean Preston's smooth, regretful voice. She let the road do what roads do when you need them to. Give you something to follow that doesn't require decisions, just movement. Her mother was waiting. Not in an obvious way. Divine Okerson did not stand at windows watching for headlights, did not come out to the curb when she heard tires on the street. She was just there when Zoe came through the door, in the kitchen, moving between the stove and the counter with the quiet efficiency of a woman who expressed most of what she felt through the act of feeding people. The apartment smelled like rice and stewed chicken, Robert's favorite, which Divine still made on Sundays the same way she always had. She looked at Zoe's face when she came in and didn't ask any questions. Just set a plate on the table. They ate together, and Zoe told her mother some of it. Enough. Not the lawsuit in full detail, not the cease and desist, not the specific mechanics of what Lattimore was trying to build, just the shape of it. The hearing postponed. The scholarship still frozen. The feeling of being pressed from every direction by something that had more resources than she did, and was not particularly worried about being fair. Divine listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of love. After dinner, Zoe sat in Grandpa Robert's chair. It lived in the corner of the living room between the bookshelf and the window, a wide armchair in dark brown fabric that had gone soft and slightly shapeless over the years from the particular weight of one particular person sitting in it for decades. They had kept it after he passed 3 years ago because getting rid of it had not felt like something either of them was ready to do, and the years had made it feel less like absence and more like presence, like he had just stepped out and would be back shortly. Zoe sat in it and held the photograph from her backpack in both hands. Robert at the 1987 tournament. That grin. Those raised arms. She thought about what Takahashi had said on the mat. He competed at nationals. He was extraordinary. She thought about the 11 years she had spent training with him in the small gym he ran out of a rented space on Fairburn Road. The smell of the mats and the squeak of her sneakers and his voice counting repetitions from the corner. She thought about how he had never once said the word nationals, never mentioned 1987, never offered it as context or credential or reason she should listen to him. He had just showed up, every time, and taught her. She could not sleep. At 11:30, she got up, moved quietly through the dark apartment, and found herself in front of the closet in the hallway where Divine kept boxes of things that did not have another home. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She pulled the chain on the overhead bulb and started moving boxes. She found it in the third one. A shoebox, inside a larger box of Robert's competition things. Ribbons, programs, handwritten training notes in his small, cramped script. Inside the shoebox, folded once, a letter on the letterhead of a regional training center in Macon, Georgia, dated 11 years ago. The director thanking Robert Okerson personally and at length for years of quiet advocacy for young athletes who had no institutional support, no financial resources, and nowhere else to go, for making phone calls, for showing up, for doing it without recognition or compensation, because he believed that talent without access was just talent wasted. Tucked inside the folded letter, a handwritten contact list. Names, phone numbers, a loose network of coaches across Georgia that Robert had apparently spent years building and maintaining. Zoe ran her finger down the list. Third name from the bottom. Vera Lattimore. She stood in the hallway with the bulb swinging slightly overhead and read the name 3 times. She brought the letter and the list downstairs. Her mother was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with tea she wasn't drinking. Zoe set the papers in front of her without speaking. Divine looked at them. Her face changed slowly, the way faces change when something lands that is both a surprise and somehow not a surprise at all. Her eyes went bright. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. "Your grandfather knew everybody," she said finally. Her voice thickened. "He never told you, because he didn't want you training for anyone's approval." She looked up at Zoe. "He wanted you training for yourself." Zoe stood in her mother's kitchen at midnight, holding a letter written 11 years ago, and felt something shift in her chest. Not break, not crack, but shift, like a door opening inward. She went to bed at 2. She slept without interruption. She was packed and in the car by dawn. The letter and the photograph both tucked inside her backpack. The address of her grandfather's old contacts written in her own handwriting on a fresh page of her notebook. She called Lattimore from the highway, the sun just beginning to show at the edge of the sky. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's finish this." Lattimore's office looked different on Monday morning. Not physically. Same filing cabinets, same 2 monitors, same faded track team photograph. But something in the atmosphere of the room had changed, the way a room changes when the person inside it has been working through the night, and the work has produced something real. 3 manila folders sat open on the desk in a careful row. A legal pad covered in Lattimore's handwriting leaned against the monitor on the left. 2 empty coffee cups had been pushed to the corner. Lattimore was already in her chair when Zoe arrived at 8. She looked like someone who had slept in pieces and had decided that was sufficient. She gestured to the chair across the desk and waited until Zoe had settled before she began. "I'm going to show you 3 things," she said, "and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do with them." She opened the first folder. Caldwell University published annual financial disclosures, required by their accreditation body, publicly accessible, boring enough that almost nobody ever read them. Lattimore had read them, all 11 years' worth, printed and tabbed with yellow sticky notes. She had gone through every logged donation from Hector Walter, the amounts, the dates, the designated purposes. She turned the folder so Zoe could see the column of figures she had highlighted in yellow. Then she opened the second folder. The Title IX office maintained a public activity log, again publicly accessible, required by federal guidelines. It did not contain the contents of individual complaints. What it contained was filing dates, case numbers, and resolution statuses. Open, closed, resolved through mediation, withdrawn. Each entry was a row in a table, stripped of names and details, just dates and outcomes. Lattimore had cross-referenced both documents. She had built a timeline. She set it in front of Zoe, a single sheet of paper, 2 columns running parallel. Left column: complaint filed, case closed within weeks, outcome listed as withdrawn or resolved. Right column: Walter donation logged within 60 days of each resolution every single time. 4 separate instances, 4 years. Perfect correspondence. "This is all public record," Lattimore said. "No sealed documents, no confidential sources. Every number on that page came from documents that anyone with a computer and a library card could access." She let Zoe look at it for a moment. "It proves nothing on its own, but it asks a question that the Board of Trustees is going to find very difficult to ignore." Zoe studied the timeline. The numbers were not subtle. They were not the kind of coincidence that reasonable people could dismiss without effort. She looked up. "What's the third folder?" Lattimore opened it. Takahashi had submitted his written statement over the weekend. Full, formal, signed, and notarized. 3 pages. He had written about the events of Friday afternoon in precise chronological detail. He had written about what he had observed of Brody Walters' behavior toward other students over 2 years of advising the karate club. The pattern of targeting. The way confrontations were always constructed to look like friendly invitation. The culture of intimidation that had been allowed to develop because the consequences for Brody had never matched the behavior. He wrote it without embellishment and without anger, which made it more powerful than either would have been. He signed it with his full name, his title, and his 22 years of faculty service at Caldwell. Zoe read the first page, set it down. "He came back." "He came back," Lattimore confirmed. "The national coverage gave him something to stand on. He told me that watching the story move the way it did made him understand that silence was its own kind of decision, and he'd made enough of those." Zoe thought about the email she had sent him. Measured, understanding, no pressure. She was glad she had written it that way. "There's one more thing," Lattimore said. She leaned back slightly. "Selina Dalton's attorney called me this morning. Selina will not testify publicly. That hasn't changed. But her attorney has found that the enforceability question around the NDA is real and significant." She paused. "Selina is willing to submit an anonymous corroborating declaration through her attorney, confirming the existence of a prior complaint and a prior financial resolution without violating the letter of her agreement. It won't have her name on it, but it will be submitted to the board's legal counsel as a verified document." The room was quiet. Zoe looked at the 3 folders laid out in a row on the desk. The donation records, the complaint timeline, Takahashi's statement, and now a 4th element, unsigned but verified, from a woman in Atlanta who had lost something to Hector Walters' machinery years ago and had found a way, finally, to say so. "Who do we take this to?" Zoe asked. Lattimore's expression was the closest thing to satisfaction Zoe had seen on her face. "Not Preston," she said. "We go over him, directly to the Board of Trustees." Tuesday arrived with the particular tension of a day that knows it matters. Zoe was up at 6. She showered, dressed, ate a full breakfast for the first time in what felt like weeks. Eggs, toast, orange juice, sitting alone in the nearly empty dining hall while the morning light came through the east-facing windows in long, flat strips. She was not calm exactly, but she was settled, which was different. Settled was what Robert had always aimed for before a competition. Not the absence of feeling, but the organization of it. Everything in its place. Nothing wasted. At 8:15, Lattimore submitted the letter to the Board of Trustees. Zoe was not in the room when it happened. She was in her 9 a.m. biology class, taking notes in her small, compressed handwriting, doing the ordinary things. But Lattimore had told her the plan in precise detail, and she tracked it in her mind like a clock she couldn't see, but could hear. The letter was 4 pages, single-spaced, formal in language, and devastating in content. It documented the donation-complaint correlation in full. Dates, amounts, outcomes, the parallel columns that asked a question no reasonable person could sidestep. It included Takahashi's notarized statement as an attached exhibit. It used the phrase pattern of institutional complicity in the 2nd paragraph and did not soften it or walk it back anywhere in the following 3 pages. It was co-signed by Takahashi and 2 additional faculty members who had approached Lattimore over the weekend after the national coverage. People who had seen things over the years and had been waiting for a moment that felt solid enough to stand on. The letter was copied to Caldwell's own legal counsel. That last detail was Lattimore's most precise move. Copying the university's lawyers meant that the administration could not claim later that the information had been withheld from them. It meant that every person in the chain of decision-making was now formally aware of what the letter contained. It closed the exits. At 10:30, while Zoe was walking between classes, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Finzor. "It's up. Going out now." She stopped on the path and clicked the link. Marcus had published his 2nd piece. Not on the student paper, that door was still closed, but on his personal blog, the same place the 1st piece had run, which now had significantly more readers than it had possessed 2 weeks ago. This piece was different from the 1st. Where the 1st had been about what happened on the mat, this one was about what happened after the mat. The donation records, the complaint timeline, the dates laid side by side in a table that was clean and simple, and required no interpretation because the pattern interpreted itself. He had sourced everything from public documents. He had named no sealed records. He had made no accusations that went beyond what the documented timeline supported. It was the kind of piece that could not be easily dismissed because it did not reach. It simply showed what was already there, in documents that had always been available, and asked why nobody had looked before. By noon, the regional black press outlet had shared it. By 1:30, the national sports account had picked it up again. By 3 in the afternoon, 2 mainstream Atlanta news outlets were running their own versions of the donation complaint story, sourced independently from the same public records Marcus had used. The story was now larger than Caldwell University's ability to contain it. At 4 p.m., Selena Dalton's attorney delivered the anonymous corroborating declaration to the board's legal office by hand, a verified document signed by counsel, confirming the existence of a prior complaint and a prior financial resolution involving the same student at a previous institution. No name, No details that violated the NDA's letter. Just confirmation from a verified legal source that this had happened before. 3 pressure points, 12 hours, all landing on the same target. At 6:15, Lattimore called Zoe. They made an offer, she said, without preamble. Zoe was sitting on her dorm bed, notebook open, pen in hand. She went still. What kind of offer? Full scholarship restoration, a financial payment, a mutual non-disparagement agreement, meaning neither side discusses the matter publicly going forward. Lattimore's voice was steady and gave nothing away. It's structured to make Brody's involvement disappear. He transfers, starts somewhere new. Zoe looked at the wall, at the corkboard, at the photograph of Robert with his arms raised and his enormous grin. What happens to the complaints? She asked. The other girls? Selena. The pattern. Does any of that get addressed? A pause. No. And the school? Preston? The donation arrangement? Internal matter, handled privately. So nothing changes. For Brody Walter, Lattimore said carefully, nothing changes. Zoe set down her pen. She picked up the folder with the settlement documents that Lattimore had sent to her phone, scrolled through 3 pages of formal language, and then set the phone face down on the bed. She thought about the freshman boy in the courtyard, going still and waiting for it to be over. She thought about Selena Dalton, 26 years old, building a practice from nothing after something had been taken from her that she never got back. She thought about the next girl, because there would be a next girl. There was always a next girl when the machinery kept running. She picked the phone back up, called Lattimore. I'm not signing, she said. Silence on the other end. Then Lattimore's voice, quieter than usual, carrying something that sounded like it might be pride. Then we go to the hearing, she said. We go to the hearing, Zoe said. Wednesday morning came with the weight of something that had been a long time building. Zoe was dressed by 7. Dark slacks, a clean white shirt, her hair natural and pulled back with the same simple band she wore to compete. She ate breakfast. Real breakfast, same as Tuesday, because Robert had always said you don't go into the important moments running on empty. She sat alone at the dining hall table and ate slowly and deliberately and thought about nothing except what was directly in front of her. Lattimore met her outside the administration building at 8:45. She was in a dark blazer, her silver hair sharp in the morning light, a leather folder tucked under one arm. She looked at Zoe once, the same measuring look she had given her that first morning in the dorm doorway, and nodded, apparently satisfied with what she found. They went in together. The hearing was held in the Board of Trustees' formal conference room on the 4th floor, a room Zoe had never been in, and that communicated its own authority through sheer size and deliberate furnishing. A long table of dark wood, high-backed chairs, framed portraits of former university presidents arranged along one wall in chronological order, each one looking out at the room with the particular confidence of men who had never expected to be questioned. 7 board members were present, seated along one side of the table. The university's legal counsel sat at the far end with a closed laptop and an expression that gave nothing away. Brody Walter was already there when Zoe and Lattimore entered. He sat on the opposite side of the table with 2 attorneys in expensive suits arranged on either side of him like parentheses. His father was not present. That absence felt deliberate, the kind of strategic distance that lawyers recommend. Brody was in a dark blazer, too, his hair neat, his posture controlled. He looked older than 20 somehow, or maybe he just looked like what he actually was. Someone who had spent his whole life in rooms where his family's name was a currency that spent easily. He looked at Zoe when she came in. She looked back. Then she sat down and opened her notebook. Lattimore presented first. She was unhurried and precise, moving through the evidence in the same logical sequence she had built it. the documented timeline of donations and complaint resolutions, the parallel columns that required no interpretation, the dates that spoke for themselves. She placed printed copies in front of each board member without theatrical emphasis, letting the documents carry their own weight. She presented Takahashi's notarized statement as Exhibit A, reading 2 paragraphs aloud in a clear, even voice, the ones that described the pattern of targeting, the constructed invitations, the culture of consequence-free intimidation. She presented the anonymous corroborating declaration from Selena Dalton's attorney as Exhibit B, explaining its legal basis and verification without identifying the source. Brody's attorneys objected 3 times. The first objection challenged the relevance of the financial donation records to a student conduct matter. Overruled, the board's legal counsel noted that patterns of institutional decision-making fell squarely within the board's oversight authority. The second objection challenged the admissibility of an anonymous declaration. Overruled, the declaration had been submitted through verified legal counsel and met the evidentiary standard for the proceeding. The third objection suggested the entire hearing had been improperly convened given the pending civil litigation. Overruled, the board's authority to conduct internal conduct reviews was independent of civil proceedings and explicitly protected under the university's own charter. After the third overruling, Brody's attorneys went quiet and made notes on their legal pads instead. Brody himself maintained his composure through most of it. He sat straight. He kept his expression neutral. He had clearly been coached extensively on how to sit in a room where things were being said about him and not react visibly. He held it until the anonymous declaration was read aloud. It was not long, 3 paragraphs, precise and stripped of emotion, describing a prior complaint, a prior financial intervention, and a prior resolution that had served the interests of one party at significant cost to the other. Brody's attorney had seen it already, but hearing it spoken in the formal silence of that room, in front of 7 board members and opposing counsel, was evidently different from reading it on paper. Something moved through Brody's composure, a brief tightening around the jaw, a shift in his eyes that he controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. Zoe saw it. She wrote nothing in her notebook. She simply saw it, and filed it away, and returned her attention to the front of the room. The board deliberated for 90 minutes. Zoe and Lattimore waited in a smaller room down the hall, with 2 cups of coffee neither of them drank much of. Lattimore read documents on her phone. Zoe sat with her hands in her lap, and her eyes on the window, and the particular stillness she had learned from years on the mat. The stillness that was not absence of feeling, but the decision to let feeling exist without letting it run. The board reconvened at 12:40. The chair read the findings without preamble. Brody Walter found responsible for a sustained pattern of targeted intimidation and harassment. The donor relationship between Hector Walter and Caldwell University found to have materially influenced the handling of prior student complaints in violation of the university's own conduct governance policy. Immediate consequences, effective that day. Brody Walter suspended for 2 full semesters, placed on permanent disciplinary probation upon any future return. Removed from all club athletic participation at Caldwell University. Dean Oswald Preston placed on administrative leave pending a separate and independent internal review of complaint handling over the prior 3 years. The Walter naming rights on the new athletic wing referred to the full board for a formal vote, to be conducted at the next scheduled meeting, with findings made public. The chair closed the folder. 48 hours later, without announcement or explanation, the civil lawsuit against Zoe Okerson and Marcus Finser was quietly withdrawn. No statement was issued, no apology was offered. The case simply ceased to exist. The way things cease to exist when the people who created them no longer have anything to gain from their continuation. Zoe found out from Marcus, who texted her 2 words at 7:15 on Friday morning. "It's gone." She was sitting in her biology class when the message came in. She read it under the desk, put her phone away, and looked back at the board where her professor was drawing a diagram of cellular mitosis, life dividing, making more of itself, continuing. She picked up her pen and kept taking notes. 2 weeks later, Caldwell University looked exactly the same. Same paths, same buildings, same dining hall smell, same 1,000 students moving through their days with somewhere to be. The courtyard where Zoe had first seen Brody Walter crouch down to a frightened boy's eye level and threaten him with a pleasant voice was just a courtyard again. Pavement and benches and an oak tree that didn't care about any of it. The recreation center where 11 seconds had changed, everything still smelled like rubber mats and effort on Friday afternoons. But some things were different. Zoe's scholarship was fully restored, confirmed in writing from the Board of Trustees' office, with a formality that felt almost excessive given what it was confirming, that a thing which should never have been threatened had been returned to its rightful place. Along with the restoration came something that Lattimore had mentioned quietly and without drama, a formal written letter of apology from the university, signed by the board chair, acknowledging that Zoe had been subjected to a flawed and inequitable process. Lattimore told her, the morning the letter arrived, that in 30 years at Caldwell she had never seen that letter written before. Zoe read it once, folded it carefully, and put it in the box with Robert's tournament photograph and the letter from the Macon Training Center. Some things you keep, not because you need to look at them, but because they are true, and the truth deserves a place to live. Dean Preston's name had been removed from the administrative directory. His office door on the 3rd floor of the administration building was closed, which it had not been before. Nobody on campus talked about it loudly, but everyone knew, which was its own kind of consequence, the particular visibility of an absence where a presence used to be. Brody Walter was gone. Not dramatically, no public removal, no scene. He was simply no longer there, the way a word disappears when you erase it, leaving only the faint impression of where it used to be. On a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the hearing, Lattimore stood before the Board of Trustees in the same 4th-floor conference room and formally proposed the creation of the Robert Okerson Athletic Integrity Scholarship, a small annual award, modest in dollar amount, significant in everything else, for a Caldwell student-athlete who demonstrated competitive excellence alongside moral courage, who showed up and did the work, and, when it mattered, did not look away from the harder thing. The board approved it unanimously. Divine Okerson was in the 3rd row. She had driven up from West Side Atlanta that morning in her good shoes and her good coat, and she sat straight-backed in her chair with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes very bright. She did not cry during the vote. She had cried at home, privately, the night before, when Zoe called to tell her it was happening. In the room she was composed and present and carried herself the way she always had, like someone who knew exactly what things cost and had decided long ago that the important ones were worth it. Zoe sat beside her. When the vote was announced, she felt her mother's hand find hers under the table and grip it once, firmly, and then let go. The following Saturday, Zoe competed at a regional open grappling tournament 40 minutes outside Atlanta. She had registered 3 weeks earlier, before any of it, before the lawsuit, before the hearing, before the board meeting. She had registered because competition was what she did, and the calendar had not moved for her personal convenience. She had almost withdrawn twice during the worst of it. She hadn't. The venue was a converted warehouse with high ceilings and bad lighting, and the particular organized chaos of a tournament morning. Coaches calling out, Athletes warming up in every available corner, the smell of liniment and chalk, and the nervous energy of people about to test themselves against each other. Lattimore was in the bleachers when Zoe arrived. She had driven herself, said nothing about it in advance, and was simply there when Zoe looked up, sitting straight, arms folded, watching the warm-up mat with the focused attention of someone who understood what they were watching. Avery was beside her, already on her feet, though the first match was 20 minutes away. Already the loudest person in a building full of loud people. She had made a sign. It was large and slightly lopsided, and it said Zoe in letters that suggested she had run out of room and improvised. Zoe shook her head when she saw it. Avery waved it harder. Divine was in the third row again. Still, composed, hands folded, eyes clear. Takahashi was near the back, standing rather than sitting, arms crossed in the same posture he'd held against the recreation center wall on the day everything started. He caught Zoe's eye when she walked to the warm-up area and nodded once. She nodded back. She won her first match in 4 minutes, her second in 6. Her third, the semifinal, against a girl from a university in Savannah who was technically excellent and genuinely difficult, went the full time and was decided on points, close enough that Zoe felt it in her lungs and her shoulders and the particular deep ache of effort. That means you gave everything available. She raised her arm when the judge pointed to her, walked off the mat, drank water, breathed. The final lasted 7 minutes and ended with a submission, 24-0, undefeated. Afterward, the venue noise went on around her. Other matches, other results. The general loud machinery of a tournament continuing without regard for any individual outcome. Zoe sat on a bench at the edge of the warm-up area with her gym bag between her feet and the particular quiet that comes after everything has been spent. And the result is exactly what it needed to be. She reached into the front pocket of her bag. The photograph was where it always was, worn at the edges now, the corners soft from handling. Robert Okerson, 1987, the tournament whose name had faded from the bottom of the image. His grin, which had not faded at all, his arms raised, his chest out, not performing, just certain. She looked at it for a long time. Across the warehouse, Avery was making her way through the crowd toward her, sign still in hand, voice already going. Divine was behind her, moving at her own pace, unhurried. Lattimore had stood from the bleachers and was watching from a distance, not approaching, giving her the moment. Zoe looked at the photograph one more time. "I know, Grandpa," she said quietly. The warehouse noise went on around her, indifferent and ordinary and exactly right. "I know." She tucked the photograph back into the front pocket, zipped the bag, swung it over her shoulder. She stood up and walked forward into the noise and the light and the people who were coming to meet her. And the story that had begun with someone deciding she was nothing ended exactly where it was always going to end, with Zoe Okerson standing. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.